My guest today is a science fiction writer whose novel, Children of Time, is a story with rapidly evolving spiders, ants that can clear a forest, and a desperate crew of humanity's last survivors. He's written many stories with an interest in animal worlds, which have won several awards. His latest book is Alien Clay. We spoke about spider ecology, science fiction, and British people's distaste for awards in March 2024. You've said before that something you're shooting for as a fiction author is a world that feels real and is bigger than the book. Do you develop a storyline as a first step, or do you kind of jump into a world and find characters there?
So for me, the world always comes first. Usually I am interested in writing about a world. I work on the world and I kind of get to the point, ideally, where I'm very familiar with it. I'm very immersed in it. I understand how the various levels of it work. And from that, for me, the characters will arise and the story will arise, because I will see from the world who are going to be the interesting people, who are going to be the people who will have those interesting kind of conflicts and clashes and friction. Where are the interesting stories going to come from? And it generally arises out of the world. And it's possible that the world, when I start off, I'll think, well, I want a world where this sort of thing happens. But in general, the world is always the core of whatever I'm doing. And I should note, this is absolutely a very personal process. And I know plenty of writers who wouldn't do things in any way in that kind of manner. Everyone has their own kind of way of approaching things.
And is that something that sort of changed since you started writing stories, or did you kind of have that style from the beginning?
I've always been that kind of world first writer. I always wanted to present the environments and the kind of the systems and the creatures and so forth to my readers. And I use the story and the characters as kind of a vehicle to do that, which is a very backwards way of doing things, I'm aware, by many authors' approaches. But for me, I need the sense that the place I'm writing in it has that kind of internal consistency and reality. And hopefully that comes through in the writing, so that my people who are reading the books feel that they are reading about a place that has an existence beyond the specific incidents and people that you're meeting.
Yeah, you have a lot of interesting non-human characters in your stories, and I'm curious, like, how do you decide which aspects of an animal's ecology or behavior you want to incorporate in a story?
Usually the individual creature will suggest what are the important ones, although very often my starting point is frequently the sensorium, because if you know how a creature kind of apprehends the world, then that tells you a lot about how it thinks and what is important to it and what it will react to. And you can build out from that.
Do you have a favorite example of ecology in science fiction?
Sue Burke's Semiosis is very good, actually. It's an ecology that is dominated by kind of interrelated, sapient, what to a human viewpoint is plant life, and the way that the whole ecology is kind of being run and managed by the actual plants themselves in this enormous kind of interconnected community. That's really interesting.
That's one I'm not familiar with, so that's one I'll have to look up. I really liked the phrase measuring legs. I was curious, is that something that you came up with, and could you describe what that meant?
Yeah, so measuring legs is used in the book. It is the spider equivalent of a dick measuring contest. There are various sort of spider mating and threat displays that involve kind of raising the legs, and one of the things you do is you're getting a sense of the size and the physical power of the other spider by sort of how energetic it is and how big the legs are and the span and that kind of thing, or that's at least how we have interpreted it. And so as the society goes on, they don't necessarily do that physically, but it becomes a kind of a watchword for someone trying to kind of throw their weight around and show you how important they are, or getting into a leg measuring contest effectively, and that kind of thing. So it just seemed, it's based on real spider behavior, but it also seemed something that would become a kind of a figure of speech or a kind of a social convention beyond the original sort of the original involved purpose of it.
That's very interesting. What I was researching, it seemed like the largest known fossil spider is about half the size of its modern relative. I'm curious, what do you think about the constraints that keep spiders small? Is it
Well,
a coincidence of evolution they haven't had bigger bodies?
it's absolutely fascinating that we genuinely live in the age of giant spiders right now. So there was a point when we thought there was a very, very large sort of carboniferous spider, which is Megarachne, which has then been reinterpreted as a marine scorpion relative. Given that certainly in the Carboniferous, for a variety of reasons, there were some very large arthropods going about. There was an Arthroplura, which was a millipede about 6 foot long, which is an amazing thing. We know it was, it was also landbound because we have the tracks that it's left, as well as partial fossils of it. It's an amazing creature. So we know they could get very big. And it's not the simple fact of having the exoskeleton or the ways of breathing weren't actually necessarily the hard limiters we might think they were. So why wasn't there a big spider? And the answer is we don't necessarily know. It may just be maybe that there was one we haven't found, or it may simply be that there was never one because particular spider lifestyle choices precluded it. I mean, spiders have, as I talk about in children's time, they have book lungs, which is a more efficient respiration system than insects, and insects certainly got very large in the Carboniferous period, and so it is possible simply that if early spiders moved on to web spinning, then presumably there is a limit to how big you can get and really sit on a web easily. But yeah, we certainly I don't think we found a fossil spider anywhere near as big as, say, a bird-eating spider or a Goliath spider in the modern day, and it's a genuinely fascinating point of paleontology, because there are close relatives like scorpions that got very big indeed.
Right, and the technology of the silk seems so helpful. You'd think that they would have experienced a lot of success and gotten big.
The thing, I mean, the other thing to remember is getting big doesn't necessarily equate to success. There's obviously some sort of biological mechanism whereby if things have a clear run at getting big, they will do so. And it is quite possibly because of things like breeding success, so that size is frequently interrelates heavily with perceived fitness in many species and that kind of thing. And or just if you can physically shunt your rivals out of the way, as happened with a lot of beetle species. But being big has a lot of disadvantages. It's energetically costly. It potentially makes you more vulnerable to predation because you can't hide as well. And so it's if you look at insects, and if you study insects in any way, you work out that very quickly that actually being big does not in any way mean successful. And frequently many insects are very successful because they're not big.
Mm-hmm. What were you like as a kid? What were your dreams growing up?
It wasn't the sort of thing that people were necessarily saying at the time, but what I was like as a kid was probably quite severely autistic. I did not get on with people. I had enormously strong fascinations. I was repeatedly told by teachers in primary school that if I considered to just try and drag spiders into everything, I would never get anywhere in life, which is advice that I thankfully completely ignored. I was a huge sci-fi buff. I loved Doctor Who. I loved Star Wars. Honestly, I was kind of like an awful lot of science fiction fans and science fiction writers. And then by about the age of 13, I got into role-playing games, which is another very common hobby for writers of my sort of general generation. And I've honestly never stopped playing them since. I'm in 3 active games at the moment.
Nice. Do you think humans are the only animal that imagines fictitious creatures? Is that tied to our facility of language and storytelling, or could it be tied to dreams?
Oh, now that is a fascinating question. I don't think I've ever heard that asked before. That's a really good one. And obviously we can't know. I would like to think, I guess, that level of imagination evolved earlier, and that it isn't necessarily tied to language. I guess the thing that when you bring language into the mix, you are able to communicate your imaginings and your dreams and things to others, and that in that conversation build upon it so that your imaginative life becomes a lot richer. It's interesting because one kind of feels, certainly dreams as we experience them, because they are not simply the replaying of memories. There is a definite inspirational, imaginative element to dreams. And we kind of know that a lot of other animals seem to have, from brain activity, dreamlike experiences while sleeping, up to and including jumping spiders, which is a relatively recent discovery. And we see eye movements in animals that can actually move their eyes. And with spiders, jumping spiders have a kind of a mobile eye component because they've got very advanced eyes for spiders. And we see that when they sleep, that moves around as if they are in very much the same way as a human or a dog or that kind of thing. On that basis, you're kind of, if you're seeing a thing in a dream, you are kind of imagining a fictitious thing. So whether obviously that the fictitious things that a dog or a cat or a mouse or a spider even are perceiving or sensing in it, whatever senses they're using in dreams, go beyond simply recreating a thing that exists in the real, I don't know. But the possibility would seem to be inherent in the experience of dreaming, that you can go beyond the bounds of reality because you're not simply replaying your actual memories. Although obviously with species which have a much simpler cognition, dreaming may be very little more than what we would feel as just very unformed experiences. And obviously it is one of the, it's fascinating, and I suspect we will never ever be able to know. But well, if yeah, I mean, I would think them. I feel it's inherent in the nature of dreams that some sort of confabulation is going on.
Very interesting. What's an animal that you would bring back from extinction?
This is a really, I mean, the obvious answer is sea scorpions or trilobites or something, or some other arthropod like that.
That's obvious. I don't.
I mean, so, well, to those who know my work, that's obviously where I'm going to go, or giant dragonflies or something like that. I think that there is which is never going to happen because we're talking about things that are, that are not just being gone, sort of the tens of thousands of years of mammoths, but have been gone for multiple hundreds of millions of years, have been gone since before the first dinosaur, that kind of thing. So there's absolutely no genetic genetic information decays sufficiently fast that even a Jurassic Park level of reconstruction isn't actually possible as far as we know. Bringing back things from extinction is a bit of a thorny moral issue. Even in Jurassic Park, it's explicitly acknowledged that they're not bringing back dinosaurs. They are creating a dinosaur-looking thing from this mishmash of DNA that has a bit of dinosaur in it. And you could do that. You could probably do that starting with a chicken. Honestly, there are probably easier ways than mucking about with amber. Making a dinosaur from a chicken is absolutely something that has been sort of at least lightly discussed by scientists. Just reverse engineering them from birds, because now we know that birds are basically dinosaurs. Mammoths are the classic one. People are always talking about bringing back mammoths. If a mammoth is anything like an elephant, and we have reason to believe it's very like an elephant, elephants are social creatures. If elephants become extinct and then you recreate an elephant, which we could probably do, that elephant isn't really an elephant, because elephants are a product of generational society and learning going back thousands and thousands of years. If you wipe out elephants and then bring back an elephant, or even some elephants, you have lost what it is for them to be elephants. In the same way that if you wipe out people and then some aliens come along and just recreate a bunch of people, where's the language coming from? Where's the culture coming from? And so there is a real quandary with this sort of thing. And I feel that the idea of recreating, and I appreciate this is a very heavy answer to a relatively sort of a light question, but it is an important point. When people are talking about recreating these things, it's basically going to be as shallow as what's the name, Richard Attenborough's character's aims in Jurassic Park. It's just like it's basically banal entertainment that owes nothing to any kind of real spirit of science. It's just like, hey, we've got a mammoth, and then 5 minutes later everyone's seen the mammoth and nobody cares.
Yeah, very interesting place to take that too. And so it sounds like if you had a red button to push to bring back something from within the last 10 million years, you're probably not going to push it, it sounds like.
I mean, honestly, if someone gave me a big red button and says, yeah, you can have Schinderhannes, or I think it's Echolopterus, the 8-foot sea scorpion, and just fill the ocean with those. I'm not sure I'd be able to restrain myself, but I don't think it would be a good idea. But I'm certainly not immune to bad ideas.
Are there any rare old books that you've drawn inspiration from?
I generally, for me, the book is its contents. I'm not a collector. I collect occasionally beautiful books like special editions, like Folio Society, things like that, of books I like. I mean, you can possibly even. I know my camera's at the slightly wrong angle, but I've got like the Dune special edition on the shelf over there.
Nice.
I don't generally get hold of antique books or anything like that. The book that would fascinate me for its content is probably the Voynich manuscript, which remained a complete enigma as to whether there is any kind of. Do you know the?
I'm not familiar.
So this is a book from, I cannot quite remember. I think it's 1600s, 1700s. It is this completely big, fully illustrated tome that is completely incomprehensible. It's written in what appears to be kind of like a nonsense alphabet. It has all of these very bizarre, sort of pseudo-alchemical looking illustrations. Nobody knows if it is an enormously elaborate joke or whether it is genuinely encoded language or what is going on. And new theories pop up every so often about what on earth is the Voynich manuscript. If you look it up, it's reasonably well. You can find lots of sort of images from it online, but it remains one of those completely mind-boggling artifacts, because either it means something, and even if what it means is just this nonsense alchemy that doesn't actually work or anything like someone, or it is this phenomenal practical joke that someone must have spent years over. But and honestly, there was kind of a market at the time. People were very much into various kind of occult studies and sciences, so quite possibly making a nonsense book and then selling it for thousands of ducats or whatever, it would have been a worthwhile venture. But we don't know, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, very interesting. If you were going to give a pep talk to someone who was going to visit the world of one of your novels, what would you say to prepare them for the experience?
Don't, for the love of God. I mean, you get the occasion. The similar question you often get is, if you could go and live in any of your novels, which one would you go and do? And really, I don't want to live in any of my novels because they're horrible places. They're terrible things happen to people. I think the alternative, the other problem is, yes, there are places in. I mean, I think, for example, you could probably have a reasonably pleasant time of things in Collegium. In the world of Shadows of the Apt, I could do a little kind of etiquette manual of topics not to talk about, sort of don't mention the war sort of thing. There are plenty of places. I mean, the whole etiquette manual I could give for going to the universe of the Final Architecture, which is my space opera trilogy, to do with which alien species you can get on with and which ones are going to be problematic and what topics not to bring up, to how not to be political in a rather sort of tempestuous environment. And if you can do that, then actually that's quite a nice universe to visit, as long as there aren't enormous moon-sized entities destroying the planet you're on, which is the thing that happens in the series. So it's a bit of a potluck sort of holiday.
Maybe don't go.
I think it's one of those. It's very hard to think of any kind. I mean, I know people say, "Oh, I'd love to visit Middle Earth," and the answer is, really, would you really love to visit Middle Earth? Even if you were literally the guest of the steward of Gondor or something, would it actually be that comfortable or pleasant or anything other than terrifying to be anywhere near any of these people? And that's, of course, the things that make these stories interesting are also the things that would make actually being anywhere near them absolutely terrifying experiences.
I think for me, I mean, going into Dogs of War and trying to get those animals on my side and have them be my private army, I feel like that would be pretty fun, but perilous for sure.
I mean, I hate to say it, but if you want them to be your private army, that does make you the bad guy in the book.
True. Yeah, that's fair. Let me jump into a question about AI. So recently we sort of flew past the Turing test with ChatGPT. Do you think scaling up large language models could summon an artificial general intelligence?
No. Pretty definitively no, because that's not what they do. It's a pattern mimicking machine. there is nothing in the functioning of that leaves room for an I to develop, I in intelligence or I as in self, either way. It can be very good at producing lifelike text, but only because it's got an enormous library of lifelike text to draw upon. I mean, are you familiar with the concept of a Chinese room?
No.
A thought experiment. I mean, it is. I will absolutely go in for it. We need a better name for that because it is kind of a problematic name for it. But the idea is, you are someone. You're in a room. You get communications in that you do not understand, but you have a big reference library. You look them up, and you turn them into. You take this means I then write that, and you turn it off. And effectively, you are doing a kind of a translation exercise without understanding either of the languages involved. And that is what an LLM is. There is no thought involved. It is a very, very complicated, extremely fast, monstrously energy hungry process for basically finding a best fit to what would this look like. And the other thing is and the thing that kind of makes me despair that we're calling these things AI is, in science fiction, AI has traditionally been something a bit like Commander Data from Star Trek. You have someone who is very logical, very effectively, and very rooted in truth and accuracy, and rather confused by vibe. What you get out of a language learning model is all 100% vibe and zero recognition of truth or meaning. And that's becoming a really serious problem because people are using AIs to produce what should be factual books. There was a very famous one a little while ago, which was a guide to edible mushrooms that was entirely AI generated. You can't do a guide to edible mushrooms through an AI. You'll get people killed because the AI doesn't actually care whether the information it's providing with is true or not. It cares whether it looks like the sort of thing that would be in a guide to mushrooms. We're getting this with academic articles. We're getting this with people are starting to use these things for teaching. People do not understand that these things are not truth machines. They are vibe machines. They will produce you something that looks plausibly like the sort of text or image or whatever it is that you want. But I saw recently there was a cookbook that had been purchased by a hospital for use by the patients, generated by AI. It had ingredients lists of things that didn't exist. It had stuff that just looked in a sort of an out of focus blurry way like they were recipes, but the AI has no concept of whether any of these things work. And in the same way, if it was writing a book, which is people are desperate to have AIs write books, you couldn't write the books that I write with an AI because I write books based on that ground up structure of meaning. So everything works together. I don't just throw a bunch of references at the wall and have a thing that looks a bit like an epic fantasy. I think, there you go. I don't think that the process involved that we're seeing from these models is ever going to give us a general AI or a powerful AI. And although what I do feel is this current bubble that is going to kind of grow and then at some point pop of people vastly investing in any kind of project where you attach the two letters AI to it will probably set back genuine AI research by a whole generation. And that's a really depressing thing. This is absolutely a false start and a dead end, and it's going to do irreparable harm to our ability to actually ever find a genuinely useful AI that can actually give us useful, meaningful answers to anything.
On the topic of existential risk, how do you think about humanity's existential risk or the risk of being knocked back to the Stone Age? And what would need to change in the world to make you feel more optimistic about our chances of flourishing in the next century?
Human nature. That is a very glib answer. Basically, and it's kind of unfair because actually there is a lot of human nature that is willing to change. I mean, I think what would have to change is our attitude to leadership, because we seem to be very easily hijacked by a very narrow group of people with a profound interest in maintaining the status quo because it will give them bumper profits in the next financial quarter or whatever. and who don't care what happens in 5 years' time, or who believe that their money and power will insulate them from whatever happens in 5 years' time, which is, I guess, is kind of the same. I think that we have, at this point now, the technology to sort ourselves out. I think that a lot of people would genuinely be willing to make the variety of small sacrifices, but bearing in mind that a small number of industries, a small number of companies even, are responsible for a vast percentage of the, say, the carbon emissions that are directly causing global warming, causing climate change. What you need is regulation. What you need is a strong government that actually cares about these things and is not deeply, deeply concerned about the profits of the fossil fuel industry, say, or various other industries that are causing problems. We need a more science-led approach. We need a more rational approach. We need people to somehow have the ability to understand that this ridiculous outpouring of conspiracy theories is basically just distracting them from what the genuine problems that are going on. We need a lot of stuff like that, and I don't think we're going to get it, but I think it's doable, and I think therefore if we fail to save ourselves and we do end up back in the Stone Age, then as we bang those rocks together, we only have ourselves to blame.
I more or less agree with all that. Yeah. It's fascinating the deep relationships people have with a ship, like a life raft, a refuge, but also a trap. If you had to live in a submarine, an Arctic research station, a desert tunnel colony, or a space colony, which one are you signing up for? And what's a companion species you would like to bring with you?
Oh, good Lord. I mean, you know what? I think the companion species I'd be most concerned with, who are the other humans involved? I do have a cat, but I'm not particularly, I'm weirdly enough, for someone who is so very concerned with animals in my writing, I've never been particularly an animal keeping person. I would like to think that I could probably last in all of those. I think space would probably be the most challenging, purely because at that point you are screwing around with all sorts of things like gravity, and I know I will be hopeless in zero gravity. I have zero physical coordination, and it just wouldn't work. I suspect I'd probably be best off at the Arctic, because I'm also not terribly fond of particularly hot weather. But it comes down to people, honestly. You need to choose your neighbours. I could live anywhere, but if the person in the next room was really fond of blasting out very loud music all the time, I think that would drive me crazy far more than just being in the Antarctic.
Very true. Very good point. Yeah. All right. An alien spaceship has arrived on Earth and requested to speak with you. After getting dressed and having a meal, you have 30 minutes to prepare. A helicopter is on its way to pick you up. How would you get ready? How would you prepare for first contact?
Well, I mean, aside from whatever clues can be gleaned from the exterior of the spaceship, assuming there are images available, this is the thing. So, Alien, I'm strongly, I do not subscribe to the kind of the human-like alien idea, which is beloved of both some sci-fi writers and some philosophers. I don't subscribe to what's called the philanthropic theory, the idea that the universe is kind of geared up by its mechanisms to produce human-like life. Anything I think that has evolved on another world would be more alien to us than anything we know on Earth by default. Is going to have entirely different mechanisms. It might have some commonality of outlook because we live in the same universe, and if it's got a spaceship, then it's presumably got a fairly advanced grasp of how physics works, how the universe works, and you'd have some sort of overlap. So I guess what I'd probably start studying is, right, let's basically get the cliff notes for particle physics and how stars work and these things. So the things that you and they will be looking at from a similar perspective, from a similar scale, you can potentially start communication like that. I mean, I guess anyone sending for me in that kind of situation, probably they're spiders or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think some kind of astrophysics primers. So we'd have something that we'd both be familiar with to talk about. And other than that, I think just an open mind, because aliens are going to be alien. I mean, this is my touchstone for I think the closest we've really got to it in film is probably Arrival. the Villeneuve adaptation of the Ted Chiang story. Because the aliens in that are gloriously alien, both physically and in outlook. And I think that's a very good starting point for anyone thinking, what would alien contact look like? Because they turn up and they're genuinely interested in communicating with us, which would not necessarily be the case with aliens. And even then, understanding what they want is inordinately difficult because they just don't see the universe, very basic parts of the universe, in the same way that we do.
Very interesting. So yeah, you try to find something you could talk about. And then you also mentioned going into it with an open mind. I'm curious, do you have, is there like a habit or ritual that maybe you use when you're writing or something to kind of relax and, go for a walk, make a cup of tea?
I mean, I certainly, the whole going for a walk or, just breaking the routine, going on a journey, and even just spending a night away from home, all of these things have served to unlock the imagination. But usually what that means is there is a problem I am working on that I need some sort of change of surroundings for some reason helps me fix. And it's probably just because when I'm away from home, there are fewer distractions, and so more of my mind can be occupied on dealing with the problem. So it's quite possible once I've had a bit of a look and a bit of an interaction with some sort of alien species, that would be the next thing is, right, let's get away and have a bit of a head clearing moment. I mean, one of the things I found, I don't tend to work particularly well with talking things through with other people, for example, which I know is one of the go-tos for a lot of people with that. I do tend to need to find answers myself, which I think is also a fairly sort of neurodiverse sort of trait I have. But I think that's also, for a writer, that's probably quite a useful way of going about things, because if you're a writer and you need to constantly talk things with other people, that's going to probably annoy a lot of other people.
Yeah, it's probably going to be pretty limiting what you can get done. In Children of Time, you explore rapid evolution and the rise of a non-human society. What challenges did you face in writing from the perspective of non-human consciousness?
So, I mean, I was talking before about dealing with the sensorium. So with the spiders or with the octopuses in Children of Ruin, the sensorium is a big part of it. And beyond that, I researched the species. And I honestly, with that, it tends to mean I find people to talk to, or I find some late books that are reasonably geared towards the moderate, the interested layman, really, because I am not I'm not a full-on scientist. I'm not a specialist. I need things broken down to me in ways that I can then communicate to my readers. And the way I tend to do as part of my world creation process is all of that will go into the world, and then each one of everything I'm using, every sort of interesting feature of the life cycle or what we understand of the cognition or behavior is like a stone dropped into a pool, and then each one creates ripples. I will see, right, where do the ripples go? What is the logical follow on? Right, well, if they're like this, then what does that mean as far as their problem solving, or what does that mean about their outlook? What does that mean about how they interact with each other? And all of these things then go together to build up my sort of gestalt of how that particular species will interact with the world and interact with people.
I saw this on your website that recently you announced you would no longer recognize your 2023 Hugo Award, which was a voluntary ethical decision due to the disenfranchisement of Chinese voters after works were left out of the competition for fear of causing political offense. I've seen there have been a couple resignations and committee changes. How do you feel about that situation now?
I have a lot of faith. I happen to know a fair number of people who were involved in this year's Glasgow-based Worldcon, obviously, because it is in my backyard. I have every faith that they're doing all that they can to remedy that. And like you say, people who were involved in last year's decision are no longer in the picture for this year's. I hope that the problem with the Worldcon and the Hugos is each year there is potentially a different group of people who are dealing with it. Although also, I know the people involved in 23 have been in place in various configurations for quite a while, and hopefully are no longer going to be given any kind of position in that kind of decision-making process, given what happened. I have every faith. I have every optimism that the process can be fixed and there can be safeguards put in place to stop something like this happening again. It's definitely a singular and unusual example of just people in power, not in any way following the rules that they were supposed to follow, but maybe just thinking, that they had been in that position for long enough that it was kind of their show and they could run it the way they wanted to run it. I mean, it's a situation, one kind of, good Lord, I used to do amateur dramatics way back in the day. And I sat in on some committee meetings there, and you get the same kind of thing. As there are people there who've been around for a long time, and they are kind of the institutional memory, and it's all very fun and games up until the point that someone disagrees with them. And then you find out that it was kind of all sort of being run because they thought that was the way it needed to be run, and didn't really matter what any of the regulations said. And the thing, this is why it's weird, because it sounds trivial when one is talking about something like this, but you do kind of need regulations that mean that excesses of personality don't start tugging the whole thing into those kind of rather murky waters.
Yeah, I thought it was a commendable move, and like based on integrity. Awards should have integrity. And
well, yeah, I mean, it had been rumbling along for a while. I mean, I said I wasn't even. I should absolutely know. I was not by any means the first person to take the step, even. But it was specifically the fact that when it came out that one couldn't even rely on the shortlists genuinely reflecting the desires of the people who were entirely eligible and permitted to vote, and that the decisions to apparently get rid of a large number of votes had been taken with no regulation or authority behind them, and just at the whim of the people involved. Then it was just, well, on that basis, I couldn't even necessarily say I should have even been on the list to be voted on, let alone win the thing. So that just seemed to be the only thing to do at that point.
Do you notice any differences in award culture in Britain compared to the rest of the world, or Britain compared to America?
The way these things work is every award is very much its own beast anyway. So even in America, the Hugos is different to the Locus Award, which is different to the Nebula Award. They are determined in different ways. Some of them have juries. Some of them are voted on by a very large number of people. Some of them are voted on by a very small number of people. I think every award has its own culture. One of the things you very quickly work out of the writer is every particular award, there are certain, if a particular book, you can think that's a good book for this award. I would not be surprised if that book turns up on the shortlist for that award, because it just feels like the sort of award that will appeal to the people who have a vote in that situation, or the people who select that situation. There is a sort of book you might think, I feel this probably will get on the Clarke's shortlist, because it's the sort of book that the Clarke's judges like. There's a sort of book you think, well, maybe this will be on the Hugo's shortlist, because it's the sort of thing that the WorldCom members tend to go for. All of these awards have their own specific culture, and the same is very much true of, I can feel there is a particular book that feels like a British Fantasy Award nominee book, and there is the British Science Fiction Award similarly has its own particular slant, and that tends to be how it goes. So I don't think necessarily it's a US UK thing. I think it's far more fragmented than that. And I mean, I don't know non-English awards from the non-English language world, but I would be extremely surprised to find that wasn't the case with those as well. I think every single group of people voting will have a particular flavor to it, and it's always going to be a bit cliquey, I guess.
I think I heard a joke or something that like British people don't like to win awards, and they also don't like to see other people win awards. And maybe so maybe there's cultural differences there, and like movies and stuff.
Movies are a very good example, because I mean everyone has heard the idea. The particular film comes out, and someone said that film is Oscar bait. That film is there. That film is specifically, the people making that film were very much thinking, we would like to win an Oscar for this film. And it's exactly, sure. There are certain films, I think people would have been inordinately surprised if Oppenheimer had not been multiply nominated for Oscars. And that's exactly the sort of thing I mean, but obviously in a bit of a smaller scale.
Right. All right. This one, I'm kind of getting near the end of my questions here. This one, parrots or corvids? Which one do you think has more potential for increasing intelligence and gaining the ability to tell stories?
That is, again, that's another really tricky question, because they really are both at the top of their game as far as intelligence goes. So just for people who are not sort of necessarily up on the research with obviously parrots are very good vocal mimics, but also there have been experiments. There with a parrot called Alex, which I dedicated children's memory to, which was able to verbally sort of solve problems, answer questions, even innovate in sort of word phrasing and things like that. So parrots are genuinely enormously intelligent. Corvids can adapt tools. They can learn observationally much more quickly than humans. Honestly, they're extremely good at it. We have the big brain, and that's what makes us intelligent. And actually, we're looking at a lot of species now and working at actually the proportional size of the brain doesn't seem to be quite as important as we think, because birds have very small brains. They have, obviously, if you're a flying bird, you have an enormous inherent weight limit. And that means your brain can never get that big. But birds seem to do incredibly complicated things with their relatively small brains. And we think actually maybe human brains are just very, very undisciplined in the way they're organized. And that may give us some of the things that make us human. Because there are certainly cognitive things going on in a human brain that other species don't seem to have. And it may simply be because we have this enormous excess of grey matter. I think I would probably just about tip over to corvids, because corvids seem to have a more practical intelligence and the tool using and so forth. But it's got to be a very close run thing. There's a bit of a flowering of animal behavioral study at the moment. And one of the things that people tend to find is wherever you look, the animals are actually a lot smarter than we always thought they were.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, for sure. I thought that question kind of gets it too. Like parrots seem to have some grasp of that language and mimicry thing, and corvids maybe have like a stronger social thing, the group dynamic. So that's interesting that you tip it over to corvids. I kind of had that same hunch.
Although there are a lot, parrots are very social animals. This is one thing about keeping lone parrots is actually a bit of a, I've certainly seen an advantage. Actually, it's maybe not the best thing to do, because parrots really need society. And one of the reasons that parrots do interact a lot with humans is because they are kind of desperate for company. And in the wild, many parrots live in enormous colonies, and they're very pushed for space. And that seems to be one thing that is a big driver of intelligence, is the fact that you just have to know where you stand with a very large number of neighbors. And so you get that social intelligence where you're right, I can push around that parrot and that parrot I can't push around, and that kind of thing. There's one thing they found with prairie dogs. Prairie dogs seem to have an incredibly sophisticated language system. And also prairie dogs have the ability to lie to other prairie dogs and things like that, which is just sort of hilarious. But they are able, and they appear to be able to innovate so that they can describe very specific things to one another about what threats are around. And again, they are creatures that live in a very large community, very closely packed in, and they are very competitive within themselves. And that's got to be a driver for a certain type of intelligence.
What's the difference between theory of mind and empathy? And how would you make the case to a child that cooperation is better than destructive competition?
I guess if you have theory of mind but not empathy, I guess you're probably somewhere on the sociopath scale, I suppose, because you understand in theory that other people think, and that is in fact how you can manipulate them and get them to do things, but you don't necessarily feel for them or really register them as real other entities in the world. They don't kind of show up on your mental map in that kind of way. As far as the child thing is, it's fascinating, because we have this idea of children as very, very kind of selfish, and frequently they are. But it's my own sort of observation, certainly with my son growing up, is that the empathy for others can be quite deep rooted, and frequently when we see children being selfish, it's because they don't necessarily think ahead. So it's a matter of that being able to project your kind of prognosis of what's going to happen if I do this just a little bit further into the future. So he's getting past that sort of immediate instant gratification sort of moment. And again, honestly, that feels like the human problem in miniature. We were talking about what would we have to change. It's just looking at corporate behavior and shareholder profits, looking at what people are willing to burn down for short-term political gain. And I'm talking about this specifically. This is very much the thing that is in the book I'm currently writing. For example. And it's where I'm talking about the idea. Well, all right, if let us if we actually start to live longer, what happens if you get the selfish billionaire? It's not a major part of the book, but the selfish billionaire who has themselves effectively made immortal by spending the GDP of a small country on sort of gene surgery and so forth. And then are they still being the selfish billionaire 150 years later, or have they started to realize, well, actually, I have done a certain amount of sowing, but I've done a hell of a lot of reaping, and maybe I should start to take less sort of short-term self-absorbed decisions because I'm going to have to live with the consequences. It's often said that we as a species are not set up for long-term thinking because the problems of, say, climate change are longer than human lifespan. But honestly, we're set up for much better long-term thinking than is frequently exhibited by people calling the shots in the world whose thinking seems to go no further than 3 months, the year in the future. We are quite capable of planting trees to shade our descendants, as I think one of the classic examples is. So yes, it's just a matter of, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the things about the way we adults or children interact with the world, they can be hacked very easily by people who have that theory of mind and maybe don't have that empathy. Just to try desperately to bring it back to the actual question you asked me.
Well, I thought you did such a nice job of really you sort of addressed that question. I thought at the end of Children of Time, and but I just want to thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today. I hope we can do this again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but feel free to drop me a line. So, thank you very much. Bye.
Adrian Tchaikovsky's latest book is Alien Clay. His next book, Service Model, will be out in June. You can find a link to his website and other footnotes from our conversation in the blog post for this podcast episode at ryanblakely.net. Thank you for listening.